Hi everyone, I'm Sophie and this is Bridie, and this video is for you if you are a small business owner and you want to reach more of your ideal clients online and connect with more customers beyond just social media. So we're going to be talking about all things PR and messaging and confidence. And I'm Sophie and I'm a self-belief coach for introverted creatives. So I help small business owners to build up their confidence and self-trust and run their businesses on their own terms. And this is Bridie and I'll let her introduce herself.
So I help small business owners promote themselves, and we're talking beyond social media. So leveraging opportunities so they get in front of new audiences and build their reputation at the same time.
Amazing. And Bridie has lots of wonderful expertise to share with us. So I'm going to be asking her a few questions today, and you're hopefully going to take away lots of tips that you can apply in your business straight away. Everything that we mention, any links or resources, will be in the description of this video. So feel free to click those links later to find out more. And also feel free to listen to this like a podcast if you don't want to watch it, because there's not much going to be happening. We're just going to be chatting away and trying to keep it quite casual, but really informative. So hopefully you'll learn a lot. So you mentioned, Bridie, that you work with small business owners, helping them to kind of reach people beyond just social media and Instagram, which I think I personally know that it's very easy just to think that that's what marketing is. And if we're going to reach people, it has to be on places like Instagram. But you help people to kind of go beyond that. So what kinds of PR opportunities are available beyond social media for small business owners?
Yeah, so I suppose the way I like to define it is that PR is really trying to get in front of new audiences. So we're trying to leverage spaces where we don't already own them. So our social media channel, our email newsletter, and our website, their audiences, well, maybe not the website, but but they're audiences that we already have. They're our own channels that we own and that we're putting ourselves on. And so then when I talk about PR opportunities, I'm really trying to think, well, where can we put you where we're leveraging an existing audience or that you don't own. So for example, guest speaking on a podcast, doing a collaboration like this because it's going on your YouTube channel, speaking at an event, guest blogging, writing an expert article for a newspaper or a website, even guest blogging. All of these things are really, really good for getting you in front of new audiences. And of course, what a lot of people will think of when they think of PR is press coverage, which is definitely one of them as well. And so I think it's really important to just think about who you're trying to reach. For example, for some businesses where their audiences and the people that are going to buy from them are local people, they just want to be thinking about well, can I print a flyer and put it on some local notice boards? That's getting in front of, people. It's getting you in a space that you don't own, getting new eyes on your business. And yeah, so there's so many opportunities like this available, and they're really good for just so I've said about getting you in front of new people, but there's also a really good reputation piece that goes along with this, which is therefore very different to marketing, because that's very much you talking about your business but on your own channel, whereas these pieces, because they're on other channels and collaborating with other people or other publications, there's an endorsement happening. So it's going to build your reputation as well, give you that credibility of your expertise being published somewhere else. And often they are longer form than, say, a social media post or an email. For example, we're going to be speaking for about 30 minutes, I think. And so you're going to really hear a lot more from each of us about how our businesses work and the approach that we take to both of our different disciplines. That's giving you a really good insight into how our businesses work, why, whether you would enjoy working with us, whether you think that the specific things that we help people with are helpful for you. And that is going to just really help to have people understand more about what you do. So there's loads of different benefits as well to the sorts of opportunities that we can take.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. That's such a good explanation. I think it's really useful as a reframe for people who think PR is just press coverage or getting in a newspaper or having a story published in a magazine, which some people kind of would think that, that's not relevant for them, but actually thinking about, how can you borrow other people's pre-existing audiences and get in front of them? That really opens it up to lots of different platforms and channels. And I really like that point you made as well about giving people a chance to kind of get to know you better. Like you said, this format, or like a guest blog post or something a bit longer form, is much more kind of trust building, I would imagine, than like you say, an Instagram caption, which also is very fleeting, right? Like that has a short shelf life. Like something that you put on Instagram is kind of there and then it's gone, or Twitter even, like it's probably even quicker, but something that lasts a long time, whether that's in print or online, like it's gonna be there for the long haul. So that sounds like that's a real good benefit as well. So what kinds of things would you say that people might need to kind of have in place if they're intending on doing more of this stuff and putting themselves out there a bit more, trying to get in front of new audiences? Is there anything that people need to think about putting in place before they do that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really easy first steps. I have had a lot of feedback from people when I talk about these things that they say, well, I just would have no idea where to start.
Right.
And often I think because it's something that maybe people don't know how that works, like certainly with the press, but even like speaking on a podcast, they're not necessarily quite sure. Do you wait to be invited? You know, like how does that work? I think it kind of maybe puts them off those more obvious first steps that you would normally take with another process. So for me, the first step is just always working out what it is you actually want to be putting out there. Like, why do you want to be doing these opportunities? What is it that you want to get known for? Like, what is it about your business that you want other people to know? And so you need to be able to articulate that clearly, not only to get the opportunity in the first place, but also when you're actually doing the opportunity. So, you know, in order to get on a podcast, you need to be able to say what expertise you can talk really well about. But then on the podcast itself, you obviously need to also be able to talk about exactly why it is that you're different to any other person. You know, today there's no one's really unique. That like we're all doing things that other people do, but we each do them in our own way. So that's really, really important. First of all, is to get to know like what that big message is that you want to be getting across. And then the next step is to think about where. So again, people might think, oh, I really feel like I should be doing more than social media. And the first step is just to sit down and brainstorm, like, where are those places? So, you know, you're thinking about your target audience and where could you get found to reach them? So, you know, the thing I love about the notice board example is it's so simple, but you're going to be coming across footfall, like on pavements that are just there, your local people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if it's that you want to get on podcasts or you want to speak at events or you want to collaborate with people, write a list, like who are those people you'd like to collaborate with, which podcasts, and you'll find that like that takes away a lot of that overwhelm, because it suddenly becomes much more straightforward. Like, oh, all it is, I actually want to speak on these 3 podcasts, and actually I know that person, so I could send them a message right away and ask how, you know, like it just takes away some of that confusion. So there would be the first 2 things that I would say to do. And then from a practical point of view, you do need a good set of images and a short biography, more so in the more formal examples, but it's really, really, really useful to have anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think anything that makes the other person's life easier, right? Like if you're pitching something, you know, if someone comes to me and says they want to write like a guest blog post for me, like if they've already got like a bio and a downloadable headshot and like links to everything really, you know, one click away, I'm much more likely to think, oh yeah, that's great, I'll take that, you know, take you up on that offer, because it just makes my life easy. So I think yeah, that's a really good point, like have your kind of stuff ready to go for people. I think as well, it sounds like you're saying with the, you know, in terms of where to look, it's like thinking about where are your kind of ideal clients hanging out, like how can I connect with someone who shares the same audience maybe. And yeah, I love the notice board idea as well. I think people really overlook that. Like imagine like if you are a yoga teacher, let's say, and you know, there's a cafe near your studio that like people who would go to that studio are already in the cafe, having something in front of them there is just a perfect way to get discovered, isn't it, by the right people. So I think probably the same principle applies with online stuff, right? Like which podcasts do my ideal customers listen to, and how can I maybe pitch myself to that one?
Yeah, and I think I'll just add on top of that like I think with marketing, a lot of audience, getting to know your audience is spoken about as well. But I think it's often about understanding your audience, what they want, what they're challenged by, what their goals are, demographics. Now, all those things are important to both marketing and PR. But I think what PR does is also going to think about like groups of people. So, for for example, the yoga person you just talked about, you know, their audiences are going to be interested in yoga, wellness, maybe meditation, things like that. And then you can suddenly loop into things that have that. So like a local meditation class, can you cross promote each other? If they're interested in wellness, is there a local health center or health shop that you can suddenly get some presence in? So thinking about those interest groups as well, like what hobbies they might have, or groups of people, so like parents, people that are interested in sport, or people that go to the gym. You know, it's like thinking about, and that helps open up even more spaces that you could get yourself seen, basically.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. Yeah, brilliant. And how you mentioned before about kind of helping people to identify what makes them unique, and that sounds like that's quite like a pivotal thing in helping people get featured in these different places. So what do you think is so important about that for small business success?
Yeah, so I think that word has a lot of pressure associated with it. I come across a lot of people who say, well, I don't think what I do is unique. So how, you know, why I wouldn't be able to do that or whatever. And like I said, I don't really believe that there's hardly anyone that's actually unique. Like, especially if we're thinking about service-based businesses like social media managers, VAs and copywriters, photographers, you know, like what you like, these roles by themselves are not necessarily doing anything, and you don't have to be doing social media management in some new or quirky way. But the specific way that you do it will always be unique. Your approach, your method, your background, even your opinions about that area, they're all things that are unique. And so these are things that you can get really clear on yourself and then use in your messaging, and when you're putting yourself forward. And that's going to be, I mean, I often refer to expert topics, so that comes into this as well.
Right.
Because it's like, if you're putting yourself forward, say for a podcast, so it's, I'm not, you wouldn't, you know, you don't want to just say, oh, I can talk about social media management, or I can talk about what makes good content, because these are topics that we've heard too many times before. It's not specific enough. So you need to come up with, well, what is your take on social media? Like, what's your method? What's your opinion on it? And these are the things that will really help to make us feel unique, or come across as unique. There's just too much competition online to not like be able to stand out. And these are the things that are going to help stand out. So it's a lot more straightforward than I think people think. But yeah, these are also the things that are going to really help with your reputation piece. So when you're like trying to get yourself out there, on opportunities, and like your sort of bio, or like about me, you know, you want to be able to have these bits up front, because yes, you're a photographer, but like, what's your approach to photography? And that will obviously help people decide you are for them or you're not for them. But it's also going to help kind of give you that one liner on like a photographer who specializes in this, or who, you know, is known for bringing X to couples on their wedding day. Like it, you know, you start to add, like, I think people always are emphasizing having everything as short as possible, and you just need to sprinkle a couple of extra details on, and that can really help make you stand out and get known for what you are specifically really good at. So that's the sort of describing yourself area of it. But yeah, like, it's also going to be really important when you're pitching yourself for topics. So we know exactly what it is that like you can actually talk about, and then a podcast host, for example, will need to know that, but their audience will also be interested in exactly what you're going to talk about. They don't just want to know that you're going to talk about social media or brand strategy. They want to know, what topics are we getting into today?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's also more memorable, isn't it? Like, thinking about the example of, like, you know, a photographer who takes X approach, like if it's something that is a bit different, like that's going to stick with someone. And so next time, you know, someone puts out a call on Facebook of like, can anyone recommend a photographer who can do such and such? You know, people are going to write on, I came across this person who offers this, and it's maybe going to stick in people's minds a bit more if they have that really kind of honed. And I think, I definitely agree with the whole, like, you know, there isn't really such a thing as like a unique business necessarily, which is you know, that's how viable businesses exist, right? Like if people need the services, then there's going to be multiple businesses offering the same thing, and that's what makes a business successful. So I think we have to take the pressure off ourselves maybe to try and like be unique in every way, and just pick a few different individual ways to be unique and to really like own that maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. And I mean, like, you know, I think another good example is that, like, say an artist, what they are actually creating is by definition usually unique. You know, they're going to be making their own artworks, and so they are actually unique pieces, products to buy. But it depends on what level you think about that. So for example, a potter, they're making vases, plates, mugs. These are, again, you know, like there's millions of places we can buy plates and mugs and vases. So like who is this? So it's not just for service providers to be able to like articulate there. I think, again, like makers maybe think, oh, well, I don't have a specific, you know, like how do I talk about my specific approach or like my opinion? But it's like, you will still have an opinion about pottery if you're a potter. You will still say like, well, okay, so you make minimal pottery. Why? You know, why do you like that? What do you like about the specific materials that you use? Like it applies to every business, but you just got to think about those details to help you stand out, and there'll always be something, but it usually helps to talk with someone else about it.
Yeah,
you don't
definitely
have that insight.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Is hearing it kind of reflected back. I think those are such good questions to offer people as well. Those prompts of like, why is it that you take this particular approach instead of another? I think sometimes that's easier for us to articulate as well, isn't it? If you're trying to think of why you do something, or what you like, sometimes it's easier to say what you don't like, or like what you don't like. I don't want to do like maximalist pottery, for example, if that's a thing. You know, that might help you to hone in on why you do it the way that you do it, if you're not quite sure off the, you know, tip of your tongue why that is. So yeah, that's a really good tip. And what it sounds like you take quite like a strategic approach to the way that you help people with like their PR and messaging, and, you know, getting themselves visible and building that credibility. What are some of the results that people can expect to see of taking that approach?
Yeah, so firstly, I thought it would be good to clarify what a strategic approach is. So for example, like in the typical, you know, you think of PR, you think of press coverage and like maybe a press release, like writing a press release and pinging that out to a list of contacts that maybe you've bought. That's not very strategic. Like it's not just about getting that message out there to as many people as possible without thinking about who they are. Or like if you Google, you know, top podcasts of 2023 and then just send them the same pitch, it's not going to yield very many results. It's not very strategic. So like this, like you might do those things, but the strategy piece is, like I've said, you know, thinking about who it is you want to reach, and what you want them to know. So doing that research to find out, what places are going to be good for you, and then what message it is you want to share in each of those different places. Then you'll need to write some sort of pitch or maybe a press release, and send it out to a good number of people. But you need that first step to make it strategic. So then when you do approach it like that, you'll be able to get in front of audiences that are closer to your own. So for example, looking for a podcast whose listeners are similar to the exact audience that you have and want. Then you're suddenly reaching a whole load of people that are just like the ones you want to reach, but that aren't necessarily already in your audience. That's going to be much more lucrative for whatever your goal is. I've got a couple of examples of results, I guess. So first one's very simple. It's actually a friend who is an illustrator and designer. And he was telling me that he got a picture and link to a bag he'd made in just a newsletter. So this was like, I think it was, you know, a blogger who maybe sends out a regular newsletter with cool things he's seen. But he has a really big list, this blogger. So then like yeah, my friend was like, yeah, suddenly I like woke up the next day to like hundreds of sales,
Wow.
you know, a bag that he'd had, I think, for a while, and maybe, you know, makes ad hoc sales. It never gets
Yeah.
like that sort of flux.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think people don't think of that as PR, but essentially you've just reached a huge audience
Yeah.
who were obviously the right sort of audience for, you know, your purchase. So yes,
Yeah.
that happened without him having a hand in it, but you could easily pitch for those sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good example of what's possible.
Yeah. And then I have another example which I guess demonstrates the more long-term, how PR is more of a long-term strategy. So about a year ago, I listened to one of the episodes of Liz Mosley's podcast. She was interviewing Hannah Eisted, and I really liked everything that Hannah said. And I really felt like I'd sort of got to know what her business was about, because it was like an hour episode and I was in the car and I listened to the whole thing. And so after that, I followed her on Instagram, and I'm now like a member of her year membership, and I recommend her to loads of people. And I feel like listening to that podcast really like fast tracked me into knowing what her business was about. So like, had I just come across her on social media, it would have taken me so much longer to follow all of her posts, and that's if they were even getting shown to me.
Yeah.
To sort of gain that same level of understanding. And probably even then I wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have been hearing her talk.
Yeah.
So because so she does like marketing and social media, so it's like her specific approach obviously came across in the way that what she designed to help people. And so I think like particularly for service businesses and coaches, it can be really hard to be fully understood, because what offer is often intangible. It's not a specific product. So it does take time to really get to know what they even do, let alone how they do it, how they offer it, and what their specific approach to it is. So I think that that's a good example of how like that one opportunity has, would have reached way more than just me, and yet it really helps people to get a good like in-depth dose of who they are in one go. And I was thinking how just like in this video, hopefully anyone watching will have a good understanding of what I'm about, like what I think about PR, and like how I think PR can help small businesses. And I think that would, it's 30 minutes hopefully around that time, and rather than maybe following me on Instagram for a long time to kind of get through the number of posts that cover the sorts of things that I'm covering today. So yeah, I think that's one of the most like underestimated benefits of PR is just like, this video is getting me in front of a new audience. It's demonstrating my expertise, and I'm being like endorsed by your brand essentially because it's going on your YouTube channel. So that is a really good example of PR.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's very similar actually to Liz and Hannah, like they're very aligned, right? Like that's why that worked, because they share an audience in common. They have probably people with very similar values, and I think the same is true for us. Like there already will be an overlap between the people that follow us both, but there'll also be many people who don't follow the other one, and therefore we're kind of sharing an audience, which is a really nice thing to do. And yeah, I think that's such a good point you make about like fast tracking. Like it almost feels like it kind of collapses the timeline of like, because I've certainly had that in the past where people have said to me, or people have booked me, and then I've said, how did you come across me? And they're like, oh, I've followed you on Instagram for like 4 years or something. And I'm like, that's amazing. But like, as you say, something that can kind of like maybe shrink that timeline down a bit is a real asset to any small business owner. And what was the other thing I was going to say about that? I've made myself forget now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I suppose, I mean, it might be that someone still follows you for what, like with Hannah, it was like probably a year ago that I listened to that podcast, but it's more the fact that I did pay attention to each of her posts.
I suppose it kind of primes you then to pay more attention, doesn't it? If you already know you're on board with the way that she approaches things and her tone and all of that, if you liked it enough to listen to it for an hour, you're going to then pay attention to the Instagram content too.
And then when that Instagram content is just like a quote, for me, it meant more because I understood what she meant by it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, and you sort of hear it in their voice, don't you? So I noticed that with them when I follow people online, like reading something, if I've heard them on a podcast or they have their own podcast or they do a lot of videos, I really hear it and I feel like more connected to them and like I trust them more, definitely. And I think, yeah, it would take a lot of Instagram stories, wouldn't it, to build that same level of kind of understanding and connection that you would get from listening to someone in your car for an hour. It's real, like, yeah, it's much more kind of intimate, I think, as well. So yeah, that's such a good example. And yeah, I love how you shared two examples that are quite different. Like one of them is kind of like feels like an overnight, like, oh my god, he's woken up to all these orders, which he didn't even like seek out on his own, right? You said it was kind of a surprise, but that's a good example of if you were to seek something out, you know, there's the real potential there if you've got the right match. It sounds like that must have been a really good, same with Liz and Hannah, like a good audience alignment kind of match as well. That's wonderful.
That's why it's so important to work out, where is it? You know, you're not going to really just say like, oh, I just want to be featured in people's newsletters. Like that just doesn't make any sense. But it's like, oh, this person has a really good audience. They're so into design, like, and I'm a designer, you know, and then you realize they have a newsletter. Well, now you definitely need to be pitching to get in that newsletter because that's like the perfect match.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that also makes it feel less overwhelming. Like as you describe that makes me think like, okay, well, that does narrow the field down. Like I don't have to worry about like I need to pitch to every single person that has a newsletter or podcast. I can just find like 5 that are like the perfect match. And I guess it's also, there's an element of experimentation probably, isn't there? Like not everyone is going to be a hit, but like you'll learn more by trying and seeing which ones land well with people and which ones actually, you know, get a lot of clicks or get a lot of mentions or whatever, versus some that maybe have less, but it's doing it that's going to teach you that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And actually that's a good tip, an easy action for someone to take away is I would say that the process for doing any of this is like, you know, it depends how much time and how much you want to bring this into your business, but at minimum, like say set a timer for 30 minutes, do the research bit, and then set a timer for 30 minutes and just contact people, you know, and do it and see what happens. And so that could be 30 minutes one week or even 1 month if you really haven't got much time, and then the next month do the sending out. And you know, we can all afford 30 minutes and then you just repeat it. And so yes, over time you do manage to contact a number of opportunities, even if you don't have much time to do like a whole, you know, oh, I need to work on my PR and people feel like they need to spend all this time on it. But if you just do it strategically in bits like that, then you will get, you know, over time you will see things come through.
Yeah, that's such a good point to kind of make like a weekly habit of it. I think that's something I definitely want to try and do. I sort of do it a bit sporadically. I do it more than probably the average business owners. I'm like really trying to, partly because I had to start a new website like 6 months ago. So I'm very much like on the hunt for backlinks constantly. But I do, it's not real. I don't have like a day a week where I set aside time I'm going to do that. But yeah, it's a good habit to get into, I think, just having like a slot on your calendar maybe for like do a bit of research, send a few pictures. And I guess also following up. Would you say that's quite an important element of it?
Definitely. I think people, are always shy about following up.
Yeah.
And actually that brings us nicely onto your bit, that like, you know, having that confidence to email and say, well, I do this and I think I could be a good fit for, you know, what you run. And then just following up, I think one of my tips with that is you're just giving them the option, you know, you're just letting them know that you do this thing and this could be useful for them. You know, if they run a small business marketing podcast and you help people with brand strategy, why wouldn't you let them know that you could come on their podcast and talk about brand strategy if they want? You know, and that's all it has to be. And then when you follow up, just say, I just wanted to, you know, check that you got my email. I'd love to hear if it was the right fit, and if not, hopefully we can work together another time. You know, that is not pushy, but you have to do it because people are so busy. The amount of emails, you know, I sometimes like get a backlog on. It's so I think let's take it over to you for more of that sort of side of things. So I mean, why does confidence matter when it comes to self-promotion and PR? Let's just start there talking about confidence.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty crucial because I mean, like I sort of hinted at before, I imagine, and this is completely anecdotal, really, maybe you know more even probably from the people that you work with, but I think I'm probably in the minority in that I actively seek out opportunities like quite regularly. I think a lot of people shy away from it, or they just assume that it's not for them, or that their business isn't big enough or established enough, or they're not enough of an expert to do it. And I think that's a real shame because people are really missing out on opportunities that they could have and that they deserve to have, but they just don't feel confident enough to do it. So yeah, I think it's really important to spend time actively nurturing that self-belief and confidence, and self-trust really is the actual thing that it is. Like, confidence is a very kind of a word we all understand, and it's kind of a catch-all, and we think maybe we need that in order to do things like, well, when I feel confident, I will then pitch to podcasts or whatever.
Yeah.
And actually what needs to happen is that we need to trust ourselves enough to give it a go and to see what happens. And I think that's probably where the fear comes from, is like, well, what if I mess it up? Like, what, I'm trying to represent my brand and my business. I'm putting my name on the line by doing this thing I'm not experienced in. What if it all goes terribly? And so I think we have these like spiraling thoughts about all the things that could possibly go wrong. And that's where the kind of resistance to putting ourselves forward and self-promoting comes from. So I certainly, to give an example of something, I sent off an email last week, which I actually had in my drafts for like a year. I went on a magazine's website and read the submission guidelines, and they're really easy, really simple. I think that's something to mention, is like, it's actually very accessible. Like, you can find someone's an editor or a publisher's email address pretty easily, and there's usually guidelines that say, if you want to pitch to us, we need this, this and this. So I'd had all the guidelines in my draft, and I left it there and had all these excuses to not do it and not get around to it. And then last week I was like, you know what, I've got nothing to lose. Like, I'll just send the email. If they don't want it, they don't want it. Maybe something more will come of it, even if they don't want this specific thing. And yeah, I just had to remind myself, like, that what's the worst that can happen? They say no, basically. If they say yes, and then I have to actually write the thing that I've pitched, then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. And again, I will actively choose to trust my abilities. Like, no, I'm not a writer. Like, that's not what my job is. I'm a coach, but I can write, and I have written before. And I can get support. I can ask for help. I can get people to read over it. And if such and such things transpire, I will handle that. And so that's really where my confidence comes from, is knowing that, like, I have my own back and I will figure it out as I go along. So I think that's something to kind of get across to people here, is that you don't need to feel like you're fully like ready or at the end point of whatever it is you're working towards doing. You can feel nervous and be scared and be worried about what might go wrong, but you can also trust yourself and remind yourself how resourceful you are and how you will learn a lot from doing it, and you can ask for help and get support. So yeah, I think does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for ages. So yes, firstly, you're right. Like, I would say, I think every single one of my clients has come to me saying, yeah, I just don't have the confidence to do it because
Right.
and there could be different reasons for that, but it's usually that what they want to come away with is feeling confident to do it. And I think I've already touched on some of those things, but like, having all these things that I've mentioned, like, prepared, can really help. So for example, like what you said about having that self-trust that you are like worthy, or you have stuff to say, it's like, I think that feels very pressured, when you haven't really thought about it. But like, I always say, write a list. What are your topics? What are your expert topics? And once you have a list, then suddenly it doesn't feel like you're putting yourself on the line. You're just saying, well, I can talk about how X improves X, and how this would benefit this type of person, or even if it's not a service-based or coach, like an artist, it's like, well, I can talk about why I work with this type of material. Suddenly it kind of removes it a little bit from yourself, and it just puts it down on paper. So I think those sorts of things really help. And also, like you said, with the submission guidelines, that's what why I always say to look things up. The amount of people that have said, oh, well, I can't really do PR because I don't have any contacts. And yes, like, getting contacts is one of the harder things, I think, but also there are so many websites that do just list them. So it's like, maybe the ones that you want to reach actually already have their contacts on the website, and you needn't have worried at all.
So have a look.
So yeah, there's so many things that you can do to like take away all those obstacles that I think we use to stop ourselves doing it, because we're not confident or we don't trust ourselves. But actually, you'd find that it's sort of a two-way thing. So actually, once you do collect all those things that you need, suddenly you will find, maybe I do feel more confident to actually do it now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's something to that, what you were saying as well, about like the kind of making it more objective, like putting distance between yourself, because that's what I hear the most is from particularly people who, for example, who are like a marketing or a social media person, like that's the service they provide. They find it really easy to write for their clients. They can do that all day long and promote them and, big them up. And when it comes to themselves, they're like, oh my God, no, I couldn't ever like, say you should book me and pay me and work with me. That feels too like braggy or out there, and just doesn't feel good to them. And the same with like products, like someone who might have gone from having a product business to being a service business, like that maybe they have maybe they're a maker and now they are a consultant or mentor to other makers. That suddenly then feels worse or harder, like to self-promote. And I think that is the reason, is because it's like, well, I'm selling myself. And I think as well, like that phrasing probably isn't very helpful in itself. I think that's something that we're trained and taught to do, is like, you need to sell yourself. And actually, of course that feels weird, like that's a really alien, horrible like phrase, so not many of us are going to be like jumping at the chance to do that. So I think making it more objective and being like, this is my business, I am at the helm, I'm running it, like it's my job, it's in my job description as the business owner to do this. Like it's I sometimes offer to people like, imagine if you were in a company, a small one, but like, and a nice one to work for, that you like, your boss is basically asking you to do marketing for you. Like if you don't do it, you're not doing your job. Like it's part of your role. And that can sometimes make it feel a bit less personal. Like, oh yeah, of course. Like if I need customers, I'm just going to have to like do some sales posts or do some kind of like marketing activity, and it makes it feel less like you're kind of like selling you as a person. So yeah, I think that's a really useful distinction to make. Something else you said stuck with me as well, which I've forgotten now, about, oh no, I think it's gone. Maybe we'll just keep going. It'll probably come back to me halfway through.
Yeah, no, very good points. So I mean, yeah, what would you say are some of the reasons that small business owners will struggle with confidence and self-promoting themselves?
I think partly what I just mentioned about like depending on their background. So if someone has come from a corporate role or working for a company, they probably never will have been expected to self-promote, apart from maybe having like their headshot on their team about page or something like that. They might have had to do that, might have been forced to do that, and so they might have had to write a little bio about themselves, and that's probably it. They never look at it, they never like send it to anyone, they never have to like think about it. And suddenly you're thrust into entrepreneurship and running your own thing, and it is just essential that we have to find a way, and we don't have to do it one way. We can find ways that work for us, but whatever the weather, we have to get ourselves in front of people, right? If we want customers, we have to let them know we exist. That's a non-negotiable part of running a business. And so I think it's just it's a big change to be expected to talk about yourself in a way that we've never had to do before if we work for someone else, or if you've come from education and gone straight into self-employment. You may just not have any experience. And how natural is it to feel scared and nervous about doing something that you have no experience doing? I think we don't like frame it in that way very often. We don't give ourselves much credit for the fact that we're doing something that's totally new. And like any skill or something that you need to practice, it's a muscle that you train by doing it. And so I think we should take the pressure off ourselves to like know instantly, or to feel comfortable instantly with doing this. Like it's not natural to instantly feel okay with it. It's okay to take time and to need to like get used to it, and kind of like like getting into cold water, like you're not going to like run straight in the sea, you're going to like gently kind of get in and get used to it and acclimatize. And I think that's the same principle we need to take with marketing and self-promotion if it feels nerve-wracking. I obviously particularly work with introverts as well, so a lot of the people that I coach are maybe a little bit quieter. They're not as kind of extroverted and outgoing and outspoken in their kind of day-to-day life, and so for them it maybe feels even more alien to do an Instagram live, for example, or post on stories and show their face. It's just not something that they have done in their life before starting a business, and so why should it feel normal straight away? So that's partly it, I think, is just the change and the newness of it. I think as well, something that I talk a lot with people is stories and beliefs that we have about ourselves, and narratives that we kind of have playing on loop in our minds, usually subconsciously. And when it comes to confidence, one of those that I've noticed a lot in myself and with people that I work with is just this idea of like confidence being something that we need to get more of or find more of outside of ourselves. Like if we don't have it, we need to go get it. Like it's this thing that exists and there's not enough to go around. Like some people have it and they're lucky, like good for them. And the ones that don't have it, we're kind of doomed and like, oh, okay, we're just going to find things harder because of that. And I certainly subscribed to that idea before. And I thought, well, I'm just not like other people. I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z because of this. And actually, that's just a story. That doesn't actually have to be true. And so it's about choosing to try on a different story for size and just like get used to it and see how it feels, because ultimately the way that we think about ourselves and the way we see ourselves and our kind of self-concept. So for example, if my self-concept is I'm not a confident person, I'm just not confident, full stop, that limits me quite a lot in what I can do, because a confident person wouldn't do this, that, or the other, or sorry, a not confident person wouldn't do, long list of things, whereas confident people get to do all that stuff. It's kind of like we're giving ourselves a box and rules to live by, which are not necessary. So by releasing the story and changing the story to something like, I can define confidence on my own terms, or, something that you can get on board with, is a really good first step, just to start to unravel that tight, like constricting story that's like, well, I'm just doomed, there's nothing I can do. I think you gave an example, didn't you, of someone saying like, oh well, I can't find any contacts, so I'm not going to be able to ever do PR. And it's like, actually no, like we can overcome that barrier, like one step at a time, by doing a little bit of research and kind of like seeing what's out there. So it just opens up your possibilities a lot more to think like, actually, what if I am allowed to have some confidence? What if it was available to me? What might that look like? How might it feel? And really kind of leaning into the story that you actually deserve to feel confident and you are worthy of feeling like able to go and get opportunities that will help your business grow, because they're out there. And like I said, some people are going out and getting them. Other people aren't, because they don't feel like they should or that they are able to. And yeah, I really want to help people to know that they can have those opportunities as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I feel like, I think we think of oh, everyone posts on social media, so that I think generally for most people it has become a bit more comfortable. And whereas like the idea of doing these other opportunities feels like something only some people do. And a lot of the people I come across say like, well, don't you have to be a certain size? And that, I think that can be a whole, a limiting factor. And I mean, that's probably true for some of the bigger podcasts, but I know that like our audiences are generally like solo, very small businesses. And so you're probably not looking to get on those like top podcasts anyway, the ones that are listened to by God knows how many people, millions of people. They're not really going to have necessarily the right audiences for you anyway. So then again, it comes down to that distancing. It's like, well, I'm not trying to put myself and my business on there necessarily. It's that I am really confident to talk about this, because maybe you did it in your career before, or maybe you've just done a degree in it, like even if you've got no experience, you can talk about that topic because you know it really well. And so what are you confident to talk about? And sort of seeing it again as that, rather than you and whether you feel you deserve it because your business is big enough, old enough, already
enough money,
enough. Exactly. Like how much money you're making is actually really, really irrelevant to what you know about. I mean, I think there's also a lot of sort of big, loud businesses in the online space who will use how much money they've made to demonstrate their expertise. And I think that really needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, because often they made their money in a different business and they're now teaching people how to do it, and that business has now changed. Even if they have made loads of money doing what they do and they're teaching other people how to do it, it's like, if you genuinely trust that you do know lots about X, then that's all you need. And that really, that will make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a good point. I think, I just remembered what I was going to say before as well about the my brain today, it just was there and it's gone again. It was to do with Oh, I know. Reframing where the focus is. So instead of it's all about me and I need to be this expert and I need to be worthy and all of that, thinking about how, like, you are ultimately here to help people or connect with people or provide some kind of something to people. You know, if you're an artist or a maker, you're bringing something into the world, a creative, you know, thing for people to experience and enjoy and benefit from. So think about that. Think about those people that they wouldn't otherwise come across you unless you put yourself out there, unless you find a way to feel comfortable with some level of self-promotion. And actually, I think potentially the idea of having somebody else kind of vouch for you and, you know, share their audience or platform with you, it can be a way to reduce that fear of like, it's me on a platform. Like having someone else do it with you, I feel like can take some pressure off and make it more enjoyable. But yeah, I think focusing on who you're here to help or who you're here to provide services or products for, and yeah, focusing on, like you said, what are a handful of topics that I feel really natural talking about. And I think as well, it is a bit strange, like even in this, you know, we were having some bloopers at the beginning of this, because as much as we both know exactly what we're talking about, like the format of sitting here and recording it feels a bit more pressured. And so I was fluffing my words a lot trying to introduce us, even though I should know what my actual like title is. So I think sometimes having someone that you do know maybe a little bit or you feel more comfortable with to ease yourself in is a nice way to approach it as well. And there was one more thing I was going to say about that. Yeah, I think it was basically just, you know, focus on the things that you are interested and passionate about talking about. And it does help as well to be asked questions. I think sometimes it is hard just to off the cuff share a, you know, a story or a piece of information about your business. But if somebody asks you a question, you might find it a lot easier and less, it might come more naturally than you expect yourself to be able to respond to something. So I think you have to trust yourself just to have a go and see how it goes. And also most things can be edited or changed, or, you know, if it went totally wrong, I'm sure there's options for not publishing it in the state that it's in or whatever. So I think it's rare that something is going to be 100% permanent and you have to stick by it forever. I mean, I started doing podcasts in about 2017, which is only my first year of business really, and I'm sure, like, I haven't listened to them recently obviously, but I'm sure there's stuff in there where I'm like, I wouldn't stand by that anymore, or like I'd be embarrassed of it, or but like you have to have that, you have to get through the first few of something in order to, you know, get better at it and to refine your message as well. I think something I learned is that having a platform to actually introduce yourself and talk about what your expertise is really helps you to hear it from a different perspective. Like you can notice, oh, actually, like the way I phrased that probably didn't make sense, like I'm going to say it slightly differently next time, or people seem to really latch onto this part of what I said, or people ask me questions about this part which I didn't think that was that interesting, but now I know people do want to know more. So I think giving yourself the chance to actually speak out loud and be asked questions, whether that's a written interview or a podcast or something, is a great way to refine what you actually want to say. And yeah, it's hard to get that without either having someone to bounce ideas off or actually like having a platform to share it. So yeah, I feel like I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think that's a valid point as well.
Yeah, so much useful information. I kept wanting to comment on everything, but yeah, I definitely say like practice, and you know, action will help you take more action and will help you feel clearer as well, like you were saying. So I mean, definitely. I remember like I always knew that what I did would work really well as a workshop. I was like, I think, so this goes into like the story you tell yourself, which I think it can be really useful to, I think generally what you're saying, you know, is it's really useful to have self-awareness, but that needs to be self-awareness that is questioned. Like, so you're not just saying, well, I take a long time to make something new, say, which was what I was telling myself about the workshop. I was like, that just feels overwhelming. Like it would take me so long to do that and write that. And it's like, well, I know that I can procrastinate with tasks like that, but then therefore you can do things to get out of your own way. So I mean, in this case, I actually did just get asked to do a workshop, so I was obviously not going to say no, and then actually it took me like 2 hours to make a workshop, and now I've got that and I can do that to like multiple people.
Yeah, amazing. You just needed a deadline.
Like, yeah, oh, that's easy. And yes, although like I can procrastinate over like creating new stuff, I'm not actually bad at creating new stuff.
There you go. Yeah, so you've changed the story and you've given yourself evidence that story wasn't actually fully true, like something else can be true.
And then also, having done that workshop, I got so many ideas for other workshops I could do. So, you know, I then like put a page on my website of like, these are all the different topics I could do a workshop on. And then I got booked for another one like after that.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's like, I think I just putting that first one out there. I mean, I think, you know, PR and these sorts of things, they are permanently available. Like your podcast is still on there, and I found it only 6 months ago. But like, you know, while you might have like, I think if you really have drastically changed the way you think about something, then yeah, I would probably try and take that down. But in general, just because you have like developed the way you talk about some of these topics, people are only going to find that podcast because they have specifically searched for something you were talking about. And therefore it's still going to help them, you know, it's still going to be you. It's still going to like bring them into your journey, and then they're going to join your community and learn your current, you know, what you're currently saying about these topics as well. So I think like never be afraid to like put stuff out there. I'm like, you know, talking to myself, I know this is something that every single person struggles with, is doing stuff for the first time. And yeah, like just taking that plunge and doing it. But like, that's why, yeah, it's really good what you said about put yourself forward for this, like writing an article, because like once you do it, then like, yeah, if they come back and say yes, you will find a way to write that, like you know. So yeah, we're all capable of it. And also never just like tell yourself, oh, I'm no good at this, so I won't be good at that. If it's something you've never tried, give it a go. And if you hated it, you don't have to ever do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you learn so much from doing something. Like you said, you know, taking action is really where like the magic happens. And I think a lot of like confidence and self-belief work, and you know, the way that I coach people is of course to do with kind of mindset and like what are the thoughts that you're thinking, what are the habits that you are practicing as a result of those thoughts. But when it comes to it, like there's only so much you can do in your own head, in your own mind. Like you have to take this stuff into the real world and test it. And like we said about, you know, telling a new story, like you gave a perfect example of that, you know, giving yourself evidence that actually what you had been telling yourself wasn't necessarily true. Like you just needed to like tweak the conditions, like you needed the outside accountability of a deadline and someone. And that's the same with me. Like I've got a workshop at the moment that someone has asked me to produce, and it will be something I can sell on my own website, but I won't make it. Like if someone wasn't waiting for me, I would not make it. So now that I've got the deadline, I'm like, and that's fine. Like we don't have to make ourselves wrong for being that way. Like a lot of people really do need external accountability to get certain things done, and that's fine. Like use it to your advantage if you know that about yourself. There's only so much that the kind of mindset stuff can do. It's like you really have to put these new beliefs into practice in the real world, and then get the feedback from it and learn from it, and like you said, notice, you know, if you don't enjoy it, then that's fine. You don't have to ever do it again. If you actually do like it, that's the other thing as well about the kind of whole introvert thing. I think a lot of people will say something like, I'm an introvert, so I could never do video, or I'm an introvert, so I could never go on a podcast. And actually I probably did agree with that too. Like in 2016, when I first started my business, I probably would have said those things. And then I did a podcast and I was like, this is so fun. Like I just got to chat to someone. And it's not that I don't like talking. Like I'm an introvert in that I need time to recover from socializing. And I definitely, you know, really get a lot of energy from spending time alone, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy a conversation. I love connecting with people. And if I'd have just held tight to that story of like, well, I can't do that because I'm an introvert, I never would have given myself the chance to discover that actually I love podcast recording and I enjoy videos. And Instagram has been a huge proponent for my business. I was a photographer before, and I got a lot of my clients through Instagram, and I wouldn't have had I not been able to practice doing stories and talking on video, because like we said before, that's created so much connection and trust with people. And the same in my coaching business. I've got a lot of my clients through Instagram, and I may never have discovered that had I sort of been convinced that, well, because I'm an introvert, I can't possibly do that. So I think it's just about expanding your perspective a little bit and being like, actually, like that, just because I identify in this way doesn't mean that certain things are not available to me. I can still experiment with stuff and see. And yeah, for some people it will be, they'll try a video and they're like, I hate that, I'm never doing it again. And that's fine. And they can really lean into written communication and doing things a different way. But for me, it was like, oh, I've made this discovery that actually this is fun for me. And so, yeah, I think it's important to keep an open mind for that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's so many different options and ways of doing that. So I think, again, I mean, I know we've had this conversation before, but introversion isn't actually necessarily about shyness, which I think often gets conflated for. But even if that is you, and you're not someone that's very sociable or like outgoing, and you are shy, and so you think, well, I couldn't do anything speaking, and lots of opportunities do involve me speaking. Well, again, have a bit more develop your self-awareness to learn, well, exactly which circumstances does that come out, like, because having a one-on-one conversation with someone, albeit videoed, might feel really comfortable. Or if it's not videoed, there's podcasts where you're obviously not being videoed and it's very edited as well, like, that one-on-one conversation might feel comfortable to someone, whereas someone else might actually think, well, I feel so under pressure when I'm talking to one person, but actually the idea of talking to a group is okay. And so there's so many different types of speaking to people. And then same with like events, it's classic, like lots of people don't like going to networking events, but there's so many different types. And there are some that you go in and you have to like do the icebreakers and stuff. And then there's like I've started just trying to meet up with people that I'm meeting online for coffees. And it has been so beneficial to my business. And obviously I don't like see it as PR, but it is technically PR. I'm meeting them. I'm sometimes meeting their friends. I'm, we're learning more about each other. And then I'm, so many opportunities have come out of those coffees, I guess, is what I'm saying, when they weren't very much just for social reasons. There's probably something that you do feel comfortable with. So don't sort of let it, just hold you back as a sort of rule.
Exactly. That's such a good point.
So we've sort of talked about the role of self-belief in marketing, but what about when it comes to selling? Like, how do you feel like that can impact small business owners?
Yeah, it's a big one. I feel like a lot of people have this sort of default belief that it's just like really icky and gross and kind of like greedy and capitalist and bro marketing and like all these like negative connotations we have with selling. And I think actually I would reframe it in the same way that you did before about something else, which I've now forgotten. My brain's not working very well today. About being helpful, basically, but focusing on what are the topics that you're an expert on that you can help people with. And I see it in the same way, oh no, that was the other thing was about sort of letting people know, and maybe it's to do with following up, like all you're doing when you follow up is just giving someone an opportunity to make a decision on their own. I think that's the biggest thing actually that has helped people that I've worked with, is this idea of like everybody, all of your customers most likely are like adults that have their own like willpower, right? Not willpower, what's the word? Free will. Like we all can make a decision about something, and we are not kind of holding a gun to someone's head and being like, you will buy this thing. Like by putting an Instagram post on, we are saying this thing is available. It would help you in X, Y, and Z ways. You might like it if you are this, that, or the other. Would you like it? And you're giving them the opportunity to say yes or no. And if they say no, that's fine. They just carry on their day and you have not harmed them or hurt them. They are just carrying on no different. And if they say yes, they're grateful that you've given them the opportunity to discover this thing that they need or want. And so I think it's really useful to think of it as an invitation rather than a kind of a pressure or an expectation or a kind of I'm forcing this on you. Instead, it's like, come on in. Like I have this thing that you might like. I've made this thing for you. Maybe you'll enjoy it. Or I can help you solve this problem that I know you struggle with. And I want to, relieve that suffering for you, or help you, make something easier, make your life easier in some way. So I think that can be a useful reframe, like an invitation rather than a kind of pressure. And also like, because usually the people who have these concerns are very considerate and conscientious and kind people, and they have strong values, and they want to, they don't want to hurt anyone, and they're very thoughtful and considerate. And so I think those people are at such low risk of doing the thing that they are afraid of, which is, being sleazy or being pushy or salesy or what's the word, manipulative. Like it's just not going to happen. Like generally speaking, like those people are not at a high risk of doing that. And so I think if you have that question in your head of like, oh, am I being manipulative? You're not, because you wouldn't, like the people who are doing that are not worried about it. The people who are genuinely, like you mentioned, I think you're probably hinting at people that I can think of with the big name, shiny course creators or whatever on Instagram who maybe do engage in some of these like manipulative salesy tactics. They're not worried about it. They're just like delighted to be making loads of money. So if you're worried about it, you're probably not at risk of doing it. So that's a good thing to remind yourself. And yeah, I think I'm trying to think of how I've actually come to feel a lot more comfortable with it. I think it is practice as well. Like, the more you do it, the less weird it feels. Like the same with the visibility piece that I mentioned at the beginning. If you've never been visible before in the way of like self-promoting like we do as small business owners, it's going to feel weird. So you need some time to adjust and get used to it. Same with selling. If saying, I've got this thing available, it's this much, would you like to pay me for it? Like that's going to feel very strange and odd for the first probably like tens and maybe hundreds of times that you do it, but that is necessary. Like you have to get through that to reach the other side where actually it's just really normal. And it's very, I feel personally quite kind of objective about it. Like I'm like, this is a service that I have available, it costs this much, I will be the person that's delivering the service, but I am not selling my soul. I am just the person who does the thing. And so that's been helpful for me to be like, actually it's essentially a product that someone can buy. It so happens that in my case that's coaching, and it's helping someone, and it's kind of like you said, intangible, which has its own like challenges, but it's a service that has a price, and I need to charge that price, and I invite people to pay it, and if they want to they say yes, and if they don't they say no, and that's the end of it. And so I think it can be quite useful, I think, to take a bit more of like a lighthearted approach and think, this is, like I said before about, if you had a boss that was saying, you're the marketing department, you need to do some marketing, you would do it because they're expecting you to do it, right? Like that's part of your job description. The same with selling. Like if you don't sell things, they won't sell, because things unfortunately don't just sell themselves, apart from in very rare unicorn situations, where, almost like we were saying before, if somebody mentions you and something sells out overnight, like that's amazing. But those are the rare occurrences, aren't they? Generally, if we want someone to buy something, we have to mention to them that it's available for sale. And so I try to put a bit of distance between myself and the thing that I'm selling. Remember that if you are a kind and values-led business owner, you're most likely to sell in a kind and values-led way. So trust yourself to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, isn't it, between like most of us have started our own businesses because we didn't want to just sort of have a job. And we wanted to do something that we really enjoyed every day. But ultimately have that balance of knowing and recognizing that it is a job, because it's so easy to conflate like our business and what we do and what we make and what we sell with us, especially obviously for service and businesses and coaches, even for makers as well. And so putting yourself out there and selling it just feels so personal, when actually it's your job. And like, I think a lot of people felt like when there's been world events and tragic events that they should like not show up on social media and not sell, but like any of your mates not going to work,
right?
It's like we have still got to make a living. Now, I mean, I'm not saying actually how I feel about any of those situations, but it's like you see it as a job. And so even when I've had really low energy, or I've maybe not been getting back to friends or something, I still try and see it separately as like, well, I can show up because this is just my job to do that. Obviously take breaks when you need to. You do not have to show up all the time.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. And like what I was going to say, definitely agree. Like a lot of people have asked me about like, oh, I feel like I'm being pushy when I pitch. But again, I always say, well, if you're asking that question, you're probably not being, you're probably not a pushy person. And I think just having, just knowing that all you're doing is sort of saying it as it is, like, these are the facts, like you say, this is what I sell, this is why. I mean, with a product, you can turn up to a market store and have the product there, and it doesn't need loads of extra context, although I would say that it helps. But like with our services, we have to give that context up front, and that's all you're doing. So I'd say that I agree with lots of those tips. So I mean, if people are watching this video or listening and thinking, I really should improve how I do this, I'm not doing lots of these things, I feel like this is me, I'm struggling with this, what would you say are some of the steps that people can take to start to develop and improve their self-trust and self-belief?
Oh yeah, good question. Well, I think in the same way that you described, starting small with like a few basic things just to get in place. Like I think you made a really good point about the practical side being like actually taking a lot of pressure off, and I think that's you know, one of the ways that our self-doubt kind of operates is that it can build things up to be this like one big thing, like a, you know, PR or getting myself out there is like this one big mountain. I can't possibly climb it. It's huge. And so you're the part of you that wants to keep you safe and protect you. And that's the part that drives any kind of procrastination behavior or maybe perfectionism or people pleasing. Like there are various habits that we engage in because we are trying to keep ourselves safe from something. It's going to want you to see that as a big mountain, because then that's not very appealing, right? You're not going to want to climb it if it looks huge. So your self-doubt is going to reinforce the story that like, oh, that's too big, that's too much, it's too overwhelming, I don't know where to start. And therefore, when you kind of, if you were to start to, you know, think about approaching it, your brain is just going to look for reasons why that's not a good idea. So like you gave the example of, well, I can't find any contacts. I'm not a PR person. I don't have any contacts. Like, how am I going to do this? Or, you know, all the big podcasts are never going to accept me. Or I don't know who my ideal client is clear enough to do this. You know, there's going to be all these reasons why you can't, because that fits with the story of like, this is too much, it's too overwhelming, I'm not going to do it. And so the first thing is really to kind of like break down that story and think, actually, is that true? Like, does it have to be this big scary thing? What if it could be easier? What if it could be simpler? And starting really, really small. So like my recommendation in this context would be something like we've done, where we know each other, you know, we've met a few times, we have a nice rapport together, like we share an audience, we've figured out that we have values in alignment and all those things that we said before. And so this feels like a kind of like, I don't want to say easy, but like easier thing than me, let's say, pitching to like Vogue. Not that that's the right place, but do you know what I mean? That was the first example that came to my head of like a big publication. Anyway, it's a different way to approach it. Whereas someone who is just a small business owner who's kind of hasn't done anything, you know, like this before, might think, oh, well, if I can't pitch to Vogue, to stick with that example, then I can't do anything. And actually it's not true. It's another way that self-doubt shows up, is this sort of black and white, all or nothing thinking. It's like, well, if I can't do that, then I can't do anything. It's like, actually, no, what if you could just team up with someone and record something on Zoom in your room? That's like quite low stakes. It feels more comfortable. We're both in our environments. Like this feels like my comfort zone, or the edge of it probably, but still it's like, it's something I can handle. So I think that's a good way to start, is to think like, what's the very, very smallest version of this big mountain, and just do one thing towards that. And even if that is literally, you know, going on Instagram and finding someone's name that you think, oh yeah, they seem cool, I feel like we probably have an alignment somewhere, or an overlap in our audiences, and just like bookmarking their page, like that counts as a task that is, you know, on this list. I think we have a habit of, what's the word, like overlooking the value of small things, like small tasks. And actually it's a really good way to build self-trust, because if you can say to yourself, today I'm going to send one email, or today I'm going to find some submission guidelines for a magazine, like, and it's quite small, but you tick it off, like the feeling that you get from doing that is going to build up your confidence and your self-trust as you go. Whereas expecting yourself to do something massive and then not doing it is just going to reinforce the story that you're not capable, or that you're too lazy, or that you procrastinate too much. And actually that story isn't true. It's just that you're asking too much of yourself. And so take really, really small bites and just go one step at a time. And yeah, in hand with that, I would say have a little non-judgmental look at the stories that you're telling yourself, whether that is, I'm too introverted, I'm too quiet, I'm too whatever, insert, you know, descriptor that you have of yourself, and just assess like, how true is that? Like, does that have to dictate the way that I approach this, or could I expand my horizons a bit and expand my perspective and look at it in a different way? Because usually those stories that we tell ourselves, again, that come from this self-doubt part of us that's very protective, they're not the full story. They're just one little section, you know, something that we have latched onto. Yeah, open your mind to the possibility that, for example, confidence is available to you, or that speaking and excuse me, losing my voice as we go, speaking and going on podcasts, or, you know, whatever these things are you might want to do, those things are available to you. Like, there's no reason why you can't have them. And it doesn't mean you need to get them tomorrow or next week. It could be like a year-long plan that you have to start doing this stuff. But the idea is to start telling the story that stuff is even accessible and possible for you. Because if you don't have that in place, it's going to be really hard. And that's when I think we can kind of get in a bit of a rut, because you might be saying, I have this goal, but I'm just not doing it. Like, why am I not, like me with the email draft? Like, I had that email for probably a year, and it's like, why am I not doing it? And all it does is reinforce this story that you're not good at it, or that you're not capable of doing it. And then we get in this horrible kind of self-berating cycle, which then makes it even harder to do the thing. So I think you have to, get on board with the story that or the possibility that there's a different story that you can tell about yourself, and take things very, very small steps at a time.
Yeah, love that. Love those tips. I was going to add something. Now I've forgotten.
Keeps happening, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I was going to say like to again, I guess it's more of a practical side of it, but like thinking about the facts, like, you know, so going back, I guess, to like, yeah, separating like it being your identity with just like what you do know. So I think when people are sort of say like their biography, you know, you have to sort of big yourself up, but it's actually just like, well, where have you been featured? And like, or what, you know, where have you written? What have you achieved? Like, how many clients have you served? How many years have you had your business? Like, all of these help to give that context of what your business is and what it has achieved and the impact of it. Yeah, like how many people have you helped improve their self-belief and self-trust? You know, like that is a really good like opening line to a biography. And it's just a fact, you know, it's not you saying, it is you saying I've helped loads of people do this, but like it's you know, you take it down,
it's not made up,
like, facts. And I think again, like on the same front, like people often dismiss what they've done. They think that what they have done is not because it's not Vogue. They have not been featured, when actually, like, you know, I've done like collaborations where it's been someone's just writing a blog post and they're looking for 5 business owners to contribute. So like one that I did recently was someone was writing about brand values, and so she asked what my brand values were and how I use them, and she asked other people in the blog post. You know, if I want to, I can now say on my website I've been featured by, and then her brand name. There is no reason not to do that. It does not have to be Vogue. You know, where have you written for? Who has interviewed you? Had a great example, which is a maker who had been interviewed by the shop that stocks her, and they put it up on their website as a blog, and she just didn't think of that as something of where, you know, she has already done this, promoted herself, like, you know, talked about what her work is. And yeah, actually, I'm sure there's loads of things that are small that we have done that are still really valuable. It is not always about getting in front of the big publications and stuff. It is just about what's most relevant most of the time. So yeah, it's great.
Definitely. I think as well that applies to, you mentioned it briefly before about your previous career. Like, even if you have, because I think sometimes you mentioned about, you know, how long have you been in business? Like, that's a fact. But if someone is a bit newer, that can be a bit of a source of imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to do this? But actually, you're likely to have got a lot of experience under your belt doing it for someone else, and that still counts. I think people too quickly write off like working with big brands or whatever if they did that under a different role, and it's like, you still did that though. Like, even though you were employed by someone, you did it, and so you get to own it and like use that as one of your credentials now. And also, like, obviously it's a bit, I suppose it's a bit like qualifications, isn't it? Like, I mean, even my degree, I never even think about what I got, but like my GCSEs, I'm not telling anyone what I got in my GCSEs now that I'm like however many years on from it. And so it's the same kind of thing. Like, the things you mention now, even if they're like small, like later, as you've built up and there's more things, you won't mention that stuff so much anymore. And that's just how it's going to organically happen. Like, you'll build up over time, and then those things will become less relevant. I suppose it's like I was saying before with my first interview that I did in 2017, where like there's things that I probably cringe at now, so I'm not going to be sharing the link to that anytime soon, but it still exists. Like you said, they have a long shelf life, so it's out there if anyone wants to find it. But yeah, you will get more stuff over time, and then you won't need to worry so much about mentioning, oh, I've had such and such a career before I've started this business, because then you'll be saying, well, I've run my own business for 15 years or whatever it is. I think we don't need to worry too much about those things. Like, it will build up over time.
I think, like, thinking about what does give you the confidence to actually do what you do. I mean, like, there's imposter syndrome where we're like, oh, well, I couldn't speak on a podcast because X reason, or like, I don't feel like I could write a biography because I've only just started or whatever. But like, so why have you just started? What gave you the confidence to start? Because even if you are fresh out of uni, there, you obviously know about, or even if you don't know, even if you're doing something that's different to your degree or whatever, there is a reason you feel like you can do this. Leverage that. And yeah, when it comes to a biography, I would say, you know, you do need examples and context, and you need to demonstrate that just like in a CV. But like, what are those reasons? Because they might be really like colloquial or anecdotal, but they're really relatable. So, you know, oh, I helped and maybe it's your friends, but you don't obviously say that, but like, you know, having realized that I can help loads of people you know, get their dream job in a great CV, I learned that I'm, you know, like sort of off the cuff example, but you know, what are those reasons that mean, you know, you can do it? Because maybe it's not about length of time in your business or qualifications, but there'll be something. And yeah, just thinking about those, I think, you know, reminding yourself, like if a friend said, well, why do you want to speak on a podcast? You know, why do you think you could do it? Well, what you would answer to a friend is probably also the reasons you can put yourself forward for why you would be able to do it. I think lots of people think, you know, it's really good to give some, in your pitch to a podcast, to give some examples of you speaking, because they want to, not because they want to check you're not rubbish, but I mean, obviously that might come into it, but most of the time they just want to get a sense of who that person is and how they talk, and what sort of episode it would be with that person, because we all speak quite differently, and it would help them plan the episode, you know. And so it doesn't have to be previous podcast episodes. Like if all you've got are some reels, or like, you know, anything you've got, even if it's just a blog post, so it's not you writing, it's not you speaking, but they can get a sense of how you talk about that topic. That's going to really help. So like, what do you have, and why do you feel confident to do this? Whatever those reasons are, then like, use them to back yourself. Even maybe it's a testimonial where, you know, they said like, oh, she was so good in the session, really helped to articulate and answer all my questions or something, you know, that's actually really good for like demonstrating that you are able to speak well. So
yeah, definitely. That's such a good point as well, about using what you have available. Like if it is reels or Instagram stories or whatever, like that is of course better than nothing. Like if you want to demonstrate that you can speak out loud about something, of course send that to people. And I think as well, like people appreciate that everybody has to start somewhere. Like you can't become a seasoned podcast guest without starting at zero. And so I think, I suppose the alternative to that is doing your own one first, but that's an unnecessary barrier to put in front of yourself. Like it's a very different thing anyway. Like it doesn't achieve the goal that podcast guesting has, which is that you're getting in front of a new audience, right? You're connecting with people that haven't already discovered you necessarily. So it's actually more beneficial to go on someone else's. But yeah, I think people probably automatically overlook stuff that they've already done that feels too small, or like, oh, this doesn't really count, but actually it definitely does. And give people the benefit of the doubt in terms of hosts or, you know, editors or whatever, people that you're pitching to. They're human as well. Like they know that you're probably a bit nervous doing this, and they're going to probably, you know, look at what you send them in the best light, and they're going to be glad that you've got in touch with them as well. Like we said, you're giving them an opportunity to I guess in terms of like journalists as well, like they don't have a job without stories, right? Like they need content, they need stuff to publish. You are offering them something that they could publish, and that makes them look good to their boss, and all sorts of things. So it's like you're actually doing them a favor by putting yourself forward, and helping them to kind of like save a bit of research time. If you present them with the bio, the pictures, a little bit of information of where you've already been featured, if anything, or examples of your own writing, like all of that stuff counts. And yeah, people will be glad to hear from you. There was one more thing that you said that I wanted to pick up on, which I think I've forgotten again. To do with, you were talking about, you know, what do you know, what can you, or why did you start this business, or why is it that you're interested in this topic? I think as well, we want to not overlook the kind of value of just passion and interest. Like if you are interested in a topic like we've done today, like both of us could probably carry on talking about this for like many hours beyond this recording, because we love it and we live it and we talk about it every day and we're thinking about it all the time. So that's probably true for most small business owners as well, in whatever their kind of discipline or, you know, area of focus is. it's likely that once you get going, you will be able to talk really at length about the thing that you're pitching for. So let that fuel you as well. Like your passion counts, your interest and your enthusiasm for your subject is enough. Like even if you don't feel like you're a super qualified expert, which you also probably are anyway, but let the passion count as well.
Yeah, and how can you apply those passions to the things you do for confidence? So like, if you feel like I don't have enough experience in this to pitch that to a podcast, well, you don't have to pitch that. You don't have to start by pitching everything you'd ideally in 5 years' time be able to pitch for. What are you confident about now? I mean, I love talking about psychology and mental health and all of these things, which is why I think we always have such fun conversations. But like, I don't have a qualification in that, so I don't feel like I should really be coming on and like, talking about all of these things. I'm not a counselor, but I can talk about how confidence can impact PR, and like I can think about, well, why am I confident to promote myself? When I first started and I didn't have any business and I hadn't, I was doing some things for the first time. I think that's the other thing, is like I've been working for 10 years before I started my business, but that I would obviously not done it in this exact guise. So however many, it could have been 30 years, I'd still be doing things new now in different ways. Like, there's a reason why small businesses aren't going to work with PR agencies. So I could have worked with every PR agency under the sun, and I probably wouldn't have been working with the exact type of businesses I do now. So there was always going to be something new for everyone at every stage of the career ladder. But yeah, how can you apply like the things that you really love talking about to your business? And yeah, how can you show up and sort of just, what are those things that that you can talk about and that you do feel qualified to talk about? Or how can you tweak that topic so that it's about something you don't feel I should be qualified for that. I mean, always question whether you do need to be qualified, but like there's certain things.
Depends what it is.
Do. And there's still something you can bring to that conversation, especially when it's, we're not coming here saying that we are therapists or whatever. We're just talking about confidence in businesses and how that's impacted us and how that's impacted our clients. So, it's like, thinking about, just what you can do and what you are happy to do, then that will make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think as well, like not take on too much responsibility. I think I meant to mention that before and then I went on a tangent, but the thing about, like, I think that was probably a thought I had when I first went on a podcast, because that was in my role as a photographer, and I think I probably had this idea of like, well, if I like tell people, if I give people advice, because usually there's some kind of, if you're going to be asked on a podcast, the person is going to ask you for kind of tips or advice or guidance to share with the listeners. And I think I probably had this thought of like, well, if I say something and someone goes and does it and it doesn't work, that's all on me, and I've like sent them off on to waste their time or whatever. And actually, like, you don't have control over what people do when they listen to it. Like, all you can do is share from your own experience and your own wisdom and expertise, and people can do with that what they will, and that's out of your hands. And that in itself is a bit scary, but I think you have to make peace with the fact that you're not responsible. Like I said before about free will, we're not forcing anyone to do anything. Like, people can implement our advice or not, and that's up to them. And you're not kind of you're not making anybody do anything. All you're doing is sharing what you're interested in and what you're passionate about, and the things that you have experience with. And you can take responsibility for that part and no more. And I think that takes the pressure off a little bit. And I think there's very few scenarios where you would be saying something that's like, oh God, I have to like take that back. Like, that doesn't count. I think we can take the pressure off ourselves to kind of articulate things completely perfectly. And we're not responsible for what people do with the information that we share in a very casual conversation that is, trying to help. I think that's a useful one to remember as well.
Yeah, definitely. So finally, we'll end, if you could just talk a little bit about the impact or potential impact that, improving your self-trust and self-belief will have on your business. And when it comes to, PR opportunities, self-promoting, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the potential is huge. I'm not going to share examples from clients because of confidentiality, but the the difference that I have noticed in myself and in clients is really to do with, I mean, risk feels like a scary word, but ultimately what we're talking about is managing risk and being able to handle different kind of psychological risks, because ultimately that is why we experience self-doubt. Is, like I said before, we're protecting ourselves from something. We're trying to stay safe and to not experience unwanted emotions or experiences or these risks. And so what you do by working on your self-doubt and self-belief is you kind of increase your tolerance for risk. So for example, with me sending off my email last week, like a year ago, that obviously held a lot of fear for me, and it made me think, this is too scary. I've drafted the email but I can't press send, and something stopped me from taking that full step. And whereas last week I just sent it. I just like made some tweaks, like got the information together and sent it, and I don't feel anything about it. Like I don't feel any worry or fear or attachment to what happens. I feel extremely neutral. I'm like, they are either going to reply or they're not going to reply. If they don't reply, I'm going to follow up like a good little business owner, because I know that people have a lot of emails. And so that's one thing I'm going to do. But beyond that, like I said before, it's out of my control. I've done my bit, which it took a lot of courage, obviously a year waiting to do it. But in the end, I feel extremely detached. I think that is the place that we can aspire to get to, is to feel neutral. And it's the same that we've mentioned a few times with that objectivity. Like, this is my job. Like, I am running a business, and yes, it's just me, but it's also my job. And like, my business needs me to do things for it to help me achieve the goals that I want to achieve and reach the people that I want to reach. And so I see it very much as like a task that is required of me. And so a few years ago I couldn't have seen it in that way. I just wouldn't have. I would have felt like, oh God, who am I to send an email to a magazine? Like, they're going to think I'm so weird, or like they're going to, I don't know, various possible worst case scenarios I would have run through in my head. Whereas now I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna see what happens. Like, they might be really glad to hear from me. They might need an article on exactly what I've pitched them, and they might be so pleased that they've got someone to fill that slot. So I can see it very differently now than I used to, and that is completely down to working on self-trust and self-belief. And I see that with clients as well, where they have come to me feeling very nervous about social media, and they don't want to show their face on Instagram, for example. They don't want to do videos. They don't want to post a picture of themselves. They don't want to write a sales caption on a post, or send emails. Like, all the different marketing activities that we engage in, those things feel really sticky and scary, and over time they build up their tolerance for that, and they are able to ease themselves in really gently. And everything that I do comes from a place of real gentleness and self-compassion. So there is never like a force yourself, just get on with it, just do it, like, vibes. That is not my approach at all, because it's not sustainable and it's not helpful. I mean, there are some people that do encourage that approach, and it might yield results on the outside, but there's a cost to that on the inside, which I don't think is worth paying. So it's very much a sustainable, gentle approach. So that might be, putting one Instagram post a month to begin with that doesn't show your face, and then the next month maybe you show your hands making something. It's a real gradual easing in, because that's what's going to make your nervous system feel acclimatized to it, because your self-doubt, like I mentioned, is this protective kind of alarm system. So the more you like freak out and scare it, the more it's going to really kind of vehemently protect you from the thing that it thinks you're going to experience. So if it thinks you're going to face criticism or judgment by posting on Instagram, it's going to make it really hard for you to press post. So you have to find a way to work with it, and to be like, it's okay, like, all I'm going to do is post this one thing, and then I'm just going to walk away from my phone and see what happens. So it's very much like working with your self-doubt rather than fighting against it, which I think is like the general rhetoric around that, is like, oh, you've got an inner critic, you need to tell it to shut up and just get on with it. Like, that's actually not very helpful. So working with it instead is more sustainable. And so that's the difference that I've seen in people that I've worked with, is that they've allowed themselves to write a new story about who they are and what they get to do and experience in terms of being visible. And they found ways to do it that actually works for them. And that might be that, someone discovers, oh, actually, like, video isn't as bad as I thought. Like, it's actually quite fun. Or, various other things that they might not have learned had they not had that self-trust to give it a go, and to just see what comes of it. So I think the impact can be absolutely huge. And obviously, the benefit of when you can do those things, when you are able to put yourself forward for stuff, you never know what might come of it. Like, you even said, going for coffee with individual people has led to opportunities that you might not have come across otherwise. Like, that's, there's so many different ways that could that you could create opportunities for yourself, that you have to let yourself experience it to get that feedback and learn from it. So yeah, I think the possibilities are pretty endless in terms of what you can achieve if you do have that self-trust in place. But yeah, it's all a practice and a kind of a habit that you have to get into, because the story and the kind of neural pathways, I guess, that are in there already about, I'm not confident, or I can't do this and I can't do that, they're pretty well trodden. And so it's not going to just change overnight. You have to take your time and really practice telling a new story. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, because I'm going to end up just rambling and saying the same thing, but you get the gist.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think I mean I think the sort of main thing we might want to take away from this is the sort of, if there's one thing, is yeah, to just start, and whatever step that does feel comfortable. Like, I think that's really interesting when you say about the sort of rhetoric of just do it, like get it done, because we have spoken about that. We have said like, well, try it.
Yeah.
We've said like give it a go, but I think that is interesting to make sure that it's not so uncomfortable that it's not actually helping you develop inside, like, over time. But I think that equally, like, some of the things that I was saying is, I found that when clients they don't know the process, that's enough to make them stop, and they think, oh, I don't want to do that, I can't do that, I wouldn't be any good at that, when actually, as soon as they sort of know how to do it, and they've got the few bits of it, assets they sort of need to get going, suddenly they are able to do it. So I think starting small, even if that is in that research bit, like working out, well, where would I like to promote myself, without any pressure that you need to do it right now, just what steps can you start to take towards it, and you will find that the more you have in place, whether that is in terms of your self-belief and self-trust, or also some of those more practical sides of it, the closer you'll get to feeling that you can do it, and starting small, no matter how small that is. Something I haven't said is, like, a lot of these opportunities are beyond social media, but social media is a great playground.
I was thinking that.
So, like, when you're talking about those expert topics, for example, how can you feed in some of that sort of expert messaging into the messaging on social media, like talking about giving examples of so it's like the brand strategist that has her approach to how she might build out a brand strategy, and, like, talking about those but, like, specifically with your angles, your methods, your opinions, like, that is still really building your expert status. It's going to be really good for your social media, but it's just practicing talking about it. And actually, in those coffees, like, everyone asks you what you do, so you practice it. Like, I was at a wedding at the weekend and people asked what I did. A stranger, I was quite caught off guard, but every time you practice talking about what it is, and I think you said this earlier as well, is like you reflect on it. So, like, I over time have obviously been asked what I do since I started the business, and I've sometimes observed, like, I always say it like this, and I don't think I need to say it like this. Like, I often say, well, I used to do this, so now I'm doing this, as if I need to say the background bit to give myself the qualification to say why I do what I do now, when actually I could just say I do what I do now. And I think I still have a little bit of insecurity around just coming forward and saying I am a coach. I feel like saying that to people that have normal office jobs feels very like putting myself forward and out there. So I think observing and learning, and what do you want to improve? Do I want to say that in a more confident way, or is that okay to me? You don't owe anyone anything. It's all about what you want to do and what works for you and what will improve your business. So always bringing it back to basics is also
that's such a good point. And I think that's really interesting what you say about hearing yourself. I learned that a lot as well from networking events, is like hearing how I say things. And I think as well, like when self-doubt is quite high for us and we're being quite driven by that, it's very easy to downplay things and to kind of be like, oh, I just do this, or I have this little business, or I've worked with a few people doing this, and in kind of act like it's not, a big deal. And actually something I found is that people will just believe you when you say what you are. Like when I first started being a photographer, I could barely even just say I'm a photographer, and then when I did once, people were like, oh cool, and I was like, what? Like how do they just believe me? And it's like, well, why wouldn't they? Like that is what you are. And so it's like, yeah, you're not lying, you're just saying what you are. And it feels weird because you've never had to use that title on your own terms, on your own, as a business owner maybe. But even if you did that role in a company, you might not have had to kind of say that thing. The more that you own it and the more conviction you share it with, the more it will be received in that way. Like you don't have to downplay it or to add these little kind of like extra words in there. You can just say how it is and then let people ask their questions, which they will, and that will give you lots of new information as well about what's interesting about this, what do people want to hear more about. So yeah, you have to let yourself experience that to get to that point. Yeah, I think that is it.
Yeah, I feel like that wraps up what we wanted to say.
Yeah, wonderful. So I will put links to our websites and Instagrams and all sorts of other places that you can find us on the internet in the notes, whatever it's called. What's it called? The description of this. And yeah, share it with someone. If you know a small business owner who could be putting themselves out there a bit more and needs a little confidence boost, then please feel free to spread it around and share the message. And yeah, that is the end. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.